Today we are looking at a case from the second part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. Christiana Herman came from a modest, respected family of German descent, part of a long-established community of Pennsylvanian Germans who had settled in the region generations earlier. Like many of their neighbours, the Hermans spoke German in daily life, attended German-language church services, and upheld traditions of hard work and strong community ties. Farming was a cornerstone of the local economy, and many families, including the Hermans, lived quietly off the land, gathering in small groups for religious observance and modest social events such as evening singing. Although her life had not followed a conventional path, Christiana, who had been born in 1845, was well regarded in the township. She was the mother of two children, aged 14 and 3, who had both been born out of wedlock, a circumstance that may have isolated some women in that time and place. But this did not have such an effect on Miss Herman, who remained at home with her parents in the quieter part of Pigeon Hills, about 6 miles northeast of Hanover and 15 miles from York. She took part in community life with quiet dignity and was admired for her friendly and cheerful nature. Despite the rigid expectations of 19th century rural morality, she was regarded as an honest and trustworthy person, liked by everyone who knew her. On the afternoon of Saturday the 7th of December 1878, Christiana set off from her family's home in Heidelberg Township to do some shopping in the nearby town of Hanover. She purchased a pair of shoes and a few other small items, and after finishing some errands, she began to walk home. It was by now around 2 o'clock. She made her way back. She stopped at the home of Mr. Rufus Schneider, who lived about 3/4 of a mile from her own residence. That evening, a small group were gathering there to sing and socialize, and Miss Herman decided to join them. She stayed until around 9 o'clock, when she collected her parcels and left to go home. At 10 o'clock the next morning, Mr. Edward Stuter, who lived in Abbottstown, was on his way to visit his father, who lived near Porter's Siding. As he travelled along the narrow road, he was startled to come across the body of a young woman lying directly in his path. She was face down, motionless, her bonnet thrown aside, and her parcels scattered nearby. The stillness of the figure and the isolated location filled him with dread. Though he couldn't tell exactly what had happened, it was clear that something serious had occurred. Shaken and alarmed, Mr. Stuter did not linger. He quickly resumed his journey, not out of indifference, but to raise the alarm. He made his way to the small village of Molestown, and when he arrived there, he informed a man named Wiley Gemmell about what he had witnessed, and together the two men returned to the scene. When they arrived, they were struck by the grim sights. Wiley Gemmell instantly recognized the woman, and looking at Mr. Stuter, he said in a shaky voice that the young lady lying in the road was Christiana Herman, and that her home was just a few hundred yards away. Police were contacted, and soon arrived. The poor dead woman had been very badly beaten. Her head had open wounds, her lower jaw had been broken, and her face was very badly cut and bruised. Officers noted that the body lay with the head pressed into the ground, which to them suggested that the blows had been delivered while she was on the floor, and they could not see any signs of a struggle or visible resistance. In fact, except for the injuries to the head and face, the rest of her body was free of wounds or bruises. Beside her lay a chestnut club, which was about 1 foot long. It was covered in blood and appeared freshly cut, either from a sapling or a young tree. As officers searched the area, they found a sapling that had been recently snapped off and presumed that this was the source of the club. Another piece of wood, about 4 feet in length and also partly stained with blood, was discovered very close to the body. As police made inquiries and word of the terrible murder spread through the surrounding farms and villages, residents began to come forward with anything they could remember. One man, upon hearing where the body had been found, recalled an incident just a few days earlier. He said that he had been driving his wagon along the same stretch of road when a long, heavy piece of wood slipped loose and fell to the ground. At the time he had not thought much of it and continued on his way, intending to retrieve it later. But now, in light of the discovery and the use to which the object might have been put, the memory took on a darker significance. The discovery had shaken the quiet community, and in order to try and find some answers, the local justice of the peace summoned a jury to conduct a formal inquest into the death. The jury visited the scene and viewed Miss Herman's body before hearing what little evidence was available at that point. Nevertheless, they were able to issue a clear and damning verdict. Christiana Herman had been feloniously and maliciously murdered by a person or persons unknown. Following the inquest, Miss Herman's body was brought back to her family home in Heidelberg Township, where by now hundreds of people had gathered, their faces drawn with grief, shock, and growing fury. What began as mourning gradually shifted as onlookers talked among themselves, trying to make sense of what had happened. Before long, a rumour began to circulate, first spoken cautiously, then repeated with growing certainty, that Christiana had been pregnant at the time of her death. For many, this changed everything. The murder was already a heinous crime, but now it carried the suggestion of a secret, a betrayal, and perhaps a desperate attempt to silence her. Almost immediately, suspicion settled on Mr. Ephraim Schneider, a young man who over the previous few years had often been seen in Christiana's company. Whether the two had been courting, or whether it was mere association, hardly mattered now. People were convinced that he had committed this act, and some swore aloud that if they found him, they would seek their own justice. The mob, however, were unable to locate Mr. Ephraim Schneider, as he was attending church in another township, unaware of the suspicion building around him. Meanwhile, as concern grew, doctors Johnson and Hollinger were called from Abbottstown to examine Miss Herman's body. One of their key tasks was to address the rumour that had quickly gained traction that she had been pregnant at the time of her death. After the post-mortem was concluded, the doctors confirmed that they found no evidence to support the claim that Christiana Herman had been pregnant. Though this medical finding was meant to officially dispel the suspicion, it did little to quell the public's mood. Instead, another rumour began to circulate that Ephraim Schneider had arranged to meet Miss Herman in the woods on the night of her death. However, when officers asked for witnesses who knew of this arrangement, no one came forward, and the police dismissed it as a rumour based on speculation and hearsay. No arrests were immediately made. The only person held was a man named Alexander Osborne, a tramp who'd arrived in York on the Monday and spoke freely about the murder. He claimed that the previous summer he had worked for a man named Mr. S. Diller, who lived in Hanover, and said that he went to see the body and was present at the inquest. There were many inconsistencies in his statement, and although authorities detained him for further questioning, they never considered him a credible suspect. On Tuesday the 10th of December, the deputy sheriff made his way through the winding roads towards the Herman residence. Inside the modest house, the body of Christiana lay in her coffin. A crowd had gathered outside, and there was an unmistakable sense of shared sorrow. Those who had come had not done so just out of respect, but from a deeper need to mourn together, and perhaps to find some small comfort in each other's presence. When the coffin was carried from the house, the procession made its way towards a small graveyard, where another group of mourners had already assembled in silence. The funeral service was led by Reverend Collar of the Lutheran Church, and as the body was lowered into the ground, the community stood in the cold, struggling to make sense of what had happened. Though the burial brought a moment of stillness, the unrest in the wider community had not settled, and there was tension in every conversation. Officer Ruser of Gettysburg was in charge of the investigation and was determined to bring the guilty party to justice. Many in York County were now beginning to sense that this was no ordinary crime, and that the case would be remembered for years to come as one that had not only taken a life, but had shaken the community to its core. Officer Ruser returned to the place where the body had been found, where he made a startling discovery. A pistol ball was embedded in the earth, in the spot where Miss Herman's head had once been. This, he believed, was conclusive evidence that she had first been shot and then brutally beaten to death with a heavy club, likely to silence her cries for help. Following this, Detective Ruser went to the home of Mr. Samuel Moule, where Ephraim Schneider both lived and worked, and searched Mr. Schneider's bedroom. Here he found a single-barrel pistol, and when compared to the bullet discovered at the scene, it matched the muzzle of the pistol exactly. He also found bullets in a cartridge box and blood on the lining of one of the pockets of Mr. Schneider's trousers. These findings left little doubt in the minds of investigators. They were now certain that Miss Herman's murder had been carried out in a cold and calculated manner, and that it was likely that Mr. Schneider was directly involved. With this new evidence, the case moved forward with renewed urgency, and District Attorney Heller ordered the body of Miss Herman be exhumed, so a second, more extensive post-mortem examination could be conducted. This examination confirmed the findings made by the doctors in the first post-mortem, but with one grim addition. A bullet wound was located. This bullet had entered one of Miss Herman's eyes and exited through the back of her head. It was this bullet that was then later discovered, embedded in the earth beneath where her body had lain. The police now believed that after brutally attacking her with a blunt object, the assailant had fired a final shot as she lay on the ground to make certain that she was dead. The damage to her skull was extensive, and doctors said that not a single bone remained intact. 8 physicians were present to witness and assist with the second post-mortem examination, and when the results were published in the press, the murder, that was already the source of widespread public alarm, now stirred even deeper outrage across the county. Ephraim Schneider was arrested and taken to the York County Prison to await his trial. The trial of Ephraim Schneider began on the 26th of April 1879 and drew intense interest throughout York County. Outside of the medical experts, most witnesses were relatives of the defendant or the deceased, or people who had attended the singing gathering the previous December. Their testimonies helped establish a clear and consistent timeline. Several of those present at the singing confirmed when they had arrived and recalled the times that Christiana Herman and Ephraim Schneider had been seen arriving and leaving. Their accounts all aligned closely, offering the court a detailed reconstruction of the evening's events. However, the case against Mr. Schneider was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. No witness could place him near the scene of the crime, and nothing in his behaviour following Christiana's death had raised suspicion. There was no confession, no eyewitnesses, and no clear motive. When all the testimony had been heard, the attorneys gave their closing arguments. W.H. Kane and E.D. Ziegler for the defence spoke for a combined total of over 2.5 hours, while H.L. Fisher, representing the prosecution, addressed the jury for another 2. Afterwards, the judge summed up the case and the jury retired at 4:30 p.m. During deliberations, one juror noticed a detail that had escaped the prosecution entirely. The bullets in the cartridge box, attributed to Mr. Schneider, were flat-tipped, while the bullets recovered at the scene of the murder had a concave base. This single inconsistency, though seemingly minor, cast doubt on the direct link between the defendant and the weapon and the bullets used in the murder. At 6 p.m, the jury returned with its verdict, not guilty. Following this, a hush fell over the courtroom before Mr. Schneider stood, thanked the jurors, and left with his counsel at his side. Public reaction was mixed. Some believed justice had been served, citing the lack of direct evidence. Others felt that a murderer had escaped punishment. In the years that followed, Ephraim Schneider married and raised a family, a son, a daughter, and later 4 grandchildren. He lived quietly and died on the 30th of March 1933, at the age of 80. No one else was ever arrested or charged with the murder of Christiana Herman. For York County, it remains an unsolved case that, as time has passed, has quietly faded from memory. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case